Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning into Health Podcast Show, the place to be to get the insights of leaders working at the intersection of health, science, and media. I'm your host, Dan Kendall, and this episode features a recording from the 2025 Health Podcast Summit, which was held on October 1st and 2nd. In total, we interviewed 42 speakers in 37 sessions that span topics across health, science, policy, and podcasting. You can wait to get access to all the sessions as we publish them here on your favorite platform, or you can get access to all the recordings, links, and resources by visiting our website at healthpodcast.org. Again, that's healthpodcast.org. Enjoy the show. Welcome to this session of Health Podcast Summit 2025. I'm your host, Dan Kendall, and our next guest is Kristen Griffiths. Kristen is Associate Director of Communications and Patient Advocacy at Incyte, which is a global biopharmaceutical company specializing in oncology and autoimmunity therapeutics. In this session, Kristen shares how she created an internal podcast with her agency, Real Chemistry. The podcast is entitled The Connection Lab. Unfortunately, it is internal, so I can't share a link to it, but she discusses how it transformed employee engagement for distributed field teams. We talk about how their employee survey data revealed the need for more leadership visibility and why an audio-forward content strategy became the perfect solution to connect internal and field-based teams. We discuss the technical and operational lessons learned, including why distributing the podcast via SharePoint created unnecessary friction and how alternative SaaS-based products can help dramatically improve adoption while also providing secure distribution of content. I'd like to take a moment to thank all our sponsors and partners who make Health Podcast Summit 2025 possible. A special thanks to our gold sponsor, BetterHelp, and to our silver sponsor, ZS. Please visit healthpodcastsummit.com for links to all these organizations and special offers. Now here's my conversation with Kristen Griffiths. Kristen, thank you so much for joining me. Welcome to Health Podcast Summit.
Thank you so much for having me, Dan. I really appreciate it.
Kristen, we've spoken a couple times over the past few years. I met you after you were on stage talking about podcasts and audio at South by Southwest. Aaron Strout hosted you and a few other people that I know on stage talking about your work there at Incyte. And I really thought with the audience that's interested in the Health Podcast Summit that you would have a really great story to share about how you're using audio to further your business objectives and some of the needs that you're using audio and podcasts to sort of fill in the gap. So first of all, can you explain what Incyte is all about?
Yeah, so Incyte's a global biopharmaceutical company. We're based out of Wilmington, Delaware, and we specialize in therapeutics for oncology and autoimmunity and immunology.
What is your role there at Incyte? What are you focused on?
Yeah, so I have responsibilities for communication and patient advocacy, and that's on the oncology side. And then also I have a carve out of my role for internal communications, which is really focused on our commercial business.
Great. It's that internal communications piece. I know a lot of companies are thinking about or working to deploy in some way. And I would like to hear a little bit more about the solution that you developed. So I understand you've launched an internal podcast. Can you tell us a little bit about the problem you were working to solve when you started to have the idea to form this?
Well, podcasts, I mean, they're often seen as a public or entertainment tools, educational maybe, but beyond the public facing podcasts, it's actually happens to be a very valuable internal communications tool, especially as remote trends have increased or accelerated over the years post-pandemic. For us, when you layer that in with expanding to a new therapeutic area, we essentially doubled the size of the commercial business. And we also introduced a new culture, really, because this new team that we're bringing on, there was some changes in the workforce demographics. And so a lot of these factors led us to do an engagement survey. And some of the learnings from that engagement survey were that we wanted to hear more from the leaders. And an internal podcasting tool happened to be a great way for us to increase communication from that leadership team and also help build connections and employee engagement internally. It's a really wonderful tool. I like to call it culture on demand because you can really access it from anywhere at any time, meets people where they are. And that's, for a lot of people, that's typically in their car.
So you did this survey and you got some data back that people wanted to hear more from the leadership. But I think you could probably, depending on how the question was worded, there's probably multiple ways of interpreting that. You could have probably done a video series. You could have done a written interview. You could have had blog posts, but you actually chose to do a podcast. So was the survey definitive that actually a podcast was something that was useful, or were they describing other things that they wanted to achieve and you realized that a podcast would actually solve that need?
We weren't specific in the questioning. It was really just hearing from leadership more. And I think personally, it's just really nice to hear from people in an authentic way. And I I think about myself as somebody who's very lucky in that I sit down the hall from some leaders within the organization and I can pass them in the coffee break room when I'm in the office every day. And I have these micro communication touch points that a lot of people don't have. And for me, I think what's nice about it is it allows you to create a sort of intimate atmosphere where you can have those touch points. It's almost like sitting down and having a cup of coffee with somebody, and you can recreate that and allow and share it with others so that other people can have that same experience without actually being in the room. And so I thought that made for a really compelling tool to use for the purposes that we had wanted to meet.
I think it's a great tool. I'm really pleased that you decided to do that. I think I told you when we first connected around the experience I had when I was a marketing manager out in California, and the CD we burned about 22 years ago, myself and a colleague who was trying to create some content to inform the sales team. We literally had a conversation over a desk with some of his recording equipment from the band that he was in. And we then had that file burned into, I think, 120 CDs, which you can barely find a CD player anymore. So that actually predates the dawn of podcasts. So I think what you've done is a really great solution. Where did you go once you had this idea to do this? How did you actually get started on implementing it within the organization? Was there some hesitancy from the executive leadership, or was there any sort of protocol you had to go through to figure out how to set this up technically or operationally?
Yeah, I think that we had to be very thoughtful about it. First, we had a business case. So we had some data to show that there was a need for increased communications among leadership. And then from there, we really wanted to be thoughtful about how we were going to create this. And we didn't just want to make it, oh, let's just kind of add it on to, what somebody's doing with their, 120 item to-do list. We really wanted to be intentional. And so we carved out part of my role to dedicate towards internal communications for the commercial team. So I think that was really important. We also needed to make sure we got buy-in from the leadership team. So once we decided we thought this would be a good way to create those internal communications, we wanted to make sure that leadership was aligned, and especially because we would be featuring them. So that was really important as well. And then we also needed to secure some budget so that we could make this really impactful, up the professionalism of it. And so we did also want to secure some money to do that. And so I think all of those things made it really important to get that leadership buy-in up front.
What sort of infrastructure did you contemplate in terms of, you mentioned that you're local to these executives, they're sharing office space. So having those sort of casual conversations in the hallway and things are very easy for you to do. Was there any thought to doing things remotely, or was there a desire to do something there on premises, or do you actually go to another site to actually record these?
Yeah, we don't do anything too fancy. I think it's great if you have a studio. We did have a conference room here in one of our buildings that had a little bit of like extra padding on the walls to allow for optimal sound. We did invest in some equipment. So we have a professional microphone. I think that really helps. But it's not like we had a whole podcasting studio. And not everybody, not all of the leaders that we interviewed are on site. And so we did do a lot of this remote podcast recording, similar to the way you and I are handling it today. with those individuals. For those, though, we did actually send them a professional microphone just to make sure that the sound quality was on par for both of the speakers.
And this is an audio forward, audio first podcast.
Yeah,
There's
it's
no
only
video component.
audio. Mm-hmm.
Great. And then since this is internal, I would imagine that there's fewer sort of regulatory and compliance and legal concerns around it, or does everything have to go through some additional review, even though the executives may have been trained about what to say and that sort, and they obviously participated in the conversation? Is there a process to make sure that this material before it goes to the sales team or the field team has been reviewed?
It's not as rigorous as a lot of the other content that we put out. It's not product related. It's not sales focused, meaning that it doesn't talk about compliance related things that you may do in sales. I mean, this is really about understanding the leaders more, understanding their personal and professional growth, and really getting to know them better as leaders, and also helping to better talk about the environment here at Incyte from a leadership point of view. And so for that, the content's not really a regulatory concern or necessarily a compliance concern, but we do always have a legal reviewer listen to the podcasts before they go out, just to ensure that there's nothing concerning that's mentioned.
And the series is called The Connection Lab. It's internal, so I've not been able to listen to it. But can you take us through sort of what the format is? You're the host of it, I understand. So do you have
Yeah.
a common set of questions, or do you do this bespoke for each conversation that you lead?
We've evolved the format a little bit each time, and it's always an interview style. So I am the host, and we always have one guest, sometimes two, if they have a job that mirrors each other on the dermatology or autoimmunity and immunology side versus the oncology side. So if there's two business partners that do the same role, sometimes we'll interview them at the same time. We have a set of questions that are always the same. One of our favorites is sharing a song that represents or resonates with them. And we always get to share that song. And because it's internally facing, we don't have to worry about copyright issues. But that is one thing that we're careful of. But there's other questions just about what lights them up, what hobbies they have, what makes them feel grateful for being in the role that they have, or what they're grateful for every day, just to kind of ground us. But generally, we also focus on what unique aspects of that role that were of the person that we're interviewing or the person themselves, what unique aspects they have to bring to the table, and get into that a little bit as well.
And what's the response been like from the people you've interviewed?
So from the people that we've interviewed, I think it's been really wonderful to see those open up in a way that they may not have had the opportunity to before. And then from the listener, it really helps them better understand who their leaders are and why they are in that role that they're in. There was a really inspiring story of one of the people that we interviewed. It was a woman, and she shared what had occurred in her personal life with dealing with a family member with a chronic disease, and how that individual is treated with medication, and how it inspired her to get into the pharmaceutical industry. And it was such a moving story. I had chills as she told it. And I think that the listeners, when they got the chance to hear it, I think that helped build that connections as well. And it really just speaks to, the fact that we're really creating something real. We're creating these conversations that connects people. And ultimately, I think those communications help give you a better sense of belonging when you're at an organization.
Yeah, I 100% agree. It's such an effective way. That CD that I mentioned that we created for our sales team, we did that at I think the mid-year meeting. And by the time we came back for the end of year meeting, the sales meeting, the feedback was that's the best piece of literature material that we'd ever provided to the sales team, because they were just able to hear in a natural conversation information they can then go apply. That was specifically in terms of features and benefits and overcoming objections of a product. But I would imagine in building a connection from an organization of several thousand people out to a field team that's distributed across the US, it fosters that connection, accelerates that connection. What has been the sort of tangible feedback? Have you been able to measure sort of the response? You had this survey that said that they wanted to feel more connected. Have you had a sort of follow-up to see if there was a lift in the sort of
Yeah.
connection, or what are the sort of the anecdotal pieces that you're hearing about the effectiveness of having this internal podcast available?
Yeah, we haven't gone and done another engagement survey yet. I think that's something that we try to space out every couple years just because it's a significant lift. But I do hope that once we send out another one, we'll get more feedback. But it has been more anecdotal. Typically, when an episode goes out, you'll hear from people who appreciated the podcast. They, just kind of sending an email, taking the time to say thanks, thanking us for doing it, for helping us learn about the leader more. I think that the guests that we have on the show, from what I understand, they are the ones that receive the majority of those emails. So as the host, I don't always get privy to what's being sent through, but the response has been really positive. And for those who take the time to listen, I think one thing about this podcast is this is not something that we require anybody to listen to. It's really sort of voluntary basis. So what's important for that is just to make it as easy to access as possible, which has been a challenge.
Has there been anything that surprised you in terms of, have there been some challenges, either technical or logistical or operational, that have been surprising to you as you've been creating this content?
I think that the challenge with creating an internal podcast is that you have to figure out the right technology to keep it private. And unlike the public ones, there's not as many tools to do that. And so we utilized SharePoint at first, and through our firewalls, people could connect and listen to the episodes. I think at first, though, for a lot of field people, that was a little bit cumbersome. And so if you have to take multiple steps to actually listen to something, you may prohibit some people from doing it if it's not quick and easy. And so that's been a challenge. So looking for alternatives to make it easier for those people to access the podcast itself. But I think just really the unexpected benefit, which we'd hoped for, our goal was to connect. That's why we called it the Connection Lab. But I think it was really just, hearing from employees that there is a little bit more comfort with the leadership team and feeling like they can open up and share their stories with the leaders, and vice versa, having the leaders open up and share their stories with the rest of the organization. It's just creates that human element and helps really mold the culture to be more people first, which I think has really been valuable.
Just to touch on your comment on the technology, there are a few different platforms that do enable private podcasts in a very effective way. So we will be sure to include some links in the notes of this episode and of this session to make sure people can access some of those resources to sort of know what's available, because SharePoint is an option, but the more you can create a sort of an in-app, distributed, easy access tool so you can reduce that friction to have people start listening, that's really important. But also to ensure that you have the privacy, so that if a device goes missing or something else happens, you want to make sure that you can pull that episode off or make sure that it's somehow protected and that content isn't accidentally available to someone. So last couple questions. You've been very generous with your time. Thanks so much for taking time with us here. Where do you see internal podcasting go in the pharmaceutical industry? You've been involved with it for a number of years. You're very active in the industry. Where do you see this going? And what would you encourage others who might be listening or watching this? What would you encourage them to think about as they try to embark on programs of their own?
Yeah, I think, gosh, I would really love to see it become a core communication tool. I'm a huge podcast fan, and I would love to see it be, more widely used internally, just because I really do think it helps humanize leadership and foster culture and deliver learning in a flexible way where people can listen on demand where they are. As the industry evolves, I really hope that podcasts will complement those existing channels like email and whatnot, and really help make complex information feel more accessible and help engage employees. if anybody wants to create it, I really would start with making sure that they have the documentation to support the reason for initiating. Like there's a need, there's a business need. So maybe consider doing a survey to demonstrate that there is that need. Carving out a little bit of a budget to do it, to up the professionalism. We did hire an agency to help support us with that. But yeah, just give it a good shot so it's worthwhile, and see how it goes, because I do think that it's a really rewarding experience based off of my experience doing it.
You did choose this path to create this audio podcast, and by doing so, you put resources into it that you didn't pursue into video or a website or things like that. So looking back, knowing what you know about the lift required to create it, the resources, the time, the impact, would you do it again?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think I would definitely do it again. I would, now we know more, utilizing those apps that are available for your phone so that it's easier to access for those field employees. I would initiate that first. Those typically take a license for every employee that wants to use them. So just be mindful of that. Uh, and now what's grown from us starting this is that other groups within the commercial business are starting to use internal podcasting. So, for example, our sales training team started one to help with more educational tools, sales training educational tools, and they have used one of these apps. And so now, and you can put multiple podcasts on the app. So now we're going to put our podcast there so that hopefully it encourages more listening. But that would be one change that I would consider from the get-go. But otherwise, yeah, absolutely. It's been really worthwhile.
You actually were just touching on the final question I have for you is what other use cases can you imagine for this? Certainly internal sales training, product launches, new things that are happening in the news cycle or in the industry that people need to be made aware of. You can certainly push this stuff out by email, but writing emails can be very time consuming as opposed to just speaking what it is that you have to say. You can have a very quick conversation in 6 minutes, but putting all that into text that people are going to be able to read, and frankly, that they will read and retain, is very difficult. So can you,
Yeah.
even outside of the internal, but just in your role, looking in the pharmaceutical industry as a whole, can you imagine some other use cases in terms of patient education? I think that was one of the things within your remit, or any other use cases that the podcast could be effective?
Yeah. Yeah. I think we're starting to see it more and more with advocacy groups, for example. So I know advocates are utilizing it as a tool to reach patients. Certainly, consumer-faced outlets, they sometimes have podcasting platforms that you can start to utilize to share your story, to create awareness for a disease state. So it's out there, it's being used. I think it could be used more and more, but it's starting to grow and catch on.
Is there anything that you would like the audience to know that I haven't asked you already?
I can't think of anything. I just, other than just, consider it. It's a wonderful tool to create authentic content that can really help build connections internally and help foster a sense of community and connection within an organization.
Kristen, thank you so much for your time and for sharing the project that you've worked on there internally at Incyte, and for giving us a little bit of a glimpse about how the audience can apply this within their own organizations. Wish you a lot of success as you roll that podcast out onto that internal podcasting platform. I do want to encourage everyone to go down to the show notes of this to get a link to some of the different platforms that are available for overcoming that sort of technical hurdle that can exist. But it sounds like you're doing a great job in the content creation and serving the audience in a way that really resonates with the soft tissue between their ears. So thank you very much for being here and participating in Health Podcast Summit.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.